So we have a couple of rumors flying around today. Two of them have to do with Metroid. The other one has to do with Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Yeah, we're going back to that one. We'll start actually with the Metroid titles. I say titles because the rumors kind of go around multiple different Metroid titles. Make sure you guys, if you enjoy these rumor videos, make sure you like them so it helps out in the YouTube weird algorithm. But let's start with these Metroid titles. One of them, of course, it has to be, right? Because of course it keeps coming back up. Metroid Prime Trilogy HD. This is from Leaky Panda, who tweeted out Nintendo is planning 2 new Metroid titles that will release in the next 2 fiscal years, respectively. One is a re-release of Metroid Prime Trilogy HD. The second one is a Super Metroid remake that mimics Samus Returns in style and scope. And yeah, I know, Metroid Prime Trilogy HD, we went through that whole thing last year with the Game Awards, where myself and several others were assuming that it would be announced. They were pretty sure, and it did not, right? It wasn't announced there. Now, what's interesting about Metroid Prime Trilogy HD, and I see a lot of people kind of talk a bit about this, like, oh, maybe it was moved around internally because Metroid Prime 4 had development issues that I think most people can pretty much assume Nintendo definitely was not expecting that one, that they would have to restart development completely. Otherwise, they wouldn't have started it in the first place with what Bandai Namco is who was working on it, seemed, and internally. Of course, Retro Studios is now working on that, so that's most likely on track pretty well right now. We can only assume with all of the hiring that Retro Studios is doing. But Metroid Prime Trilogy HD, does anyone really think it doesn't make... Everyone thinks it makes sense, right? You bring over that collection of Metroid Prime games because Metroid Prime has never been like a big-time seller. So you feel like you move those over to give people a chance to get caught up with the series for when Metroid Prime 4 comes out. Now, of course, 1, 2, and 3, you play through all 3 of them, you'll be ready for 4, and that will take some time. So I would assume that Metroid Prime Trilogy HD would be probably ready at least a year before Prime 4 comes out. I don't think they'd release it in the same year, and I almost feel like it would have been better to get it out as soon as possible to give people enough time to play them, especially since Bayonetta 1 and 2, that collection got released, and we're still waiting for even gameplay footage of Bayonetta 3. So to me, you can pretty much release it at any time and it'd be fine. And of course, it's a trilogy that's been released on other platforms, so it's not like it's new to everyone completely. We've seen this before elsewhere. I'll be curious if they take advantage of the Joy-Con motion controls or any of that, or they make any improvements to visual quality. That'll be the interesting part. I don't know if it's a Game Awards thing. I'm gonna leave that alone. They'll announce it whenever they announce it, and then it'll come out. It could end up being next year. It could be the year after. I do think it's somewhat dependent, like I said, on whenever Metroid Prime 4 is going to release. The other one is a Super Metroid remake, and I saw this. I look at Super Metroid. I don't know if that needs a remake. Like, I kind of step back and look at that and I say, the game has not aged poorly. Like, it's on. You can play it now if you have the Super Nintendo app, and it still looks fine. Like, you can play it, and I don't know, it seems fine to me. I don't really look at... I really haven't looked at Metroid Prime, or Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo, especially when it showed up on the Super Nintendo app. Like, I didn't pick it and go, we really need a remake for this. It didn't cross my mind, just because 2D Super Nintendo games like that tend to age fairly well compared to the 3D era that followed with the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64, and then going further back to the Game Boy. The Game Boy, of course, you remake that, it's going to be like a world of difference. Look at Link's Awakening. But Super Metroid, I don't know if that's needed. And of course, we know it's going to be a $60 game. Super Metroid is not a long game. So that's my other thought. Is that a game that should be a $60 game if it's just going to be a fresh coat of paint without any extra additions? I mean, we saw Link's Awakening kind of get that kind of a scrutinized for its price point, and that is definitely a longer game than Super Metroid, and quite a bit more to it if you really sit down and look at it with all of the dungeons. And they did at least add kind of the dungeon maker. I don't know. Super Metroid, I don't know if that needs a remake. I'd prefer a brand new 2D one, right? I mean, if they really wanted to, technically they could move over Samus Returns, because that didn't sell tremendously well on the 3DS anyway, mostly because it was like the end of the 3DS lifespan and we had just had Prime 4 announced when they unveiled that. But I would prefer a new 2D Metroid game, but there have been rumors about a 2D Metroid for a while, and I think like a year and a half to 2 years. It's been floating around for quite a while. I think it was like early 2018 when it started to make the rounds. So I'm not surprised to hear about a 2D Metroid releasing either, I guess fiscal year, that'd be, I guess it'd be before April then, or after April, and then go through that fiscal year to the next one. Not surprising to hear about a 2D Metroid. I'm just trying to think of which one they would release first. Would it be Metroid Prime Trilogy HD or this 2D Metroid game? Because I don't think they'd both be released in the same year as Leaky Panda is putting out here with the rumor. They'd be in different fiscal years. So I feel like I would prefer to have the new game first. So if it's a new 2D Metroid game, I'd rather have that. But if it's a remake of Super Metroid, I'd rather have the Prime Trilogy first, and then I'll get the Super Metroid when they remake that. I would still pick it up. I like Super Metroid a lot, but I'd hope they do something extra with it, whether it's new parts of the map, some original content that gets added, just something. Okay, so Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. This series has pretty much crashed and burned pretty badly, I would say. I didn't think they were going to do anything else with this, and it's because they've had some pretty bad games released. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 was a disaster. If you remember, it came out, it was glitchy as anything. It was like people were falling through the levels. It was bad. And then they turned the servers off after they pretty much gave up on it, and half the game just stopped working. Like, don't even buy it now because the servers are off and it barely works. And then, of course, we had Tony Hawk Pro Skater HD. I remember picking that up on Steam before, when it first came out, it was out, and I was like, oh, cool, they did something with the older Tony Hawk games. They kind of like mashed them into one. Visually, it wasn't great. I remember on the PC, I loaded it up. That's where I picked it up on Steam, which it's been delisted, by the way. And we'll talk a bit about, I think, why that is. But I remember I picked it up, and there's like no visual options. You can just play around with the resolution. Even if you sync up a controller, it still shows keyboard prompts. It was a very, very half-baked product that they put out. Not good. Like, if you go online and look it up, most people are like, ugh, this game. It's not great. It wasn't a good effort. We'll say that. So to hear that they would be possibly testing the first and second ones being remade, that was very interesting. Now, this seemed to be made like overall public by Sabi on Twitter, as you're seeing here, mentioning an Activision contact told me a week or so ago about how Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 had demos or prototypes remade. They went around internally. I didn't share before as I wasn't sure if they were being remade as full games or just a test. Now, the thing about this is Liam Robertson also shared this information before this on his podcast, and I had talked to him previously about it as well, just kind of kicking around the ideas of it. And I was unsure as well about it, so I had heard about this previously, but it sounded to me, based on the context and the information going around, that these were more or less kind of being focus group tested or just tested internally, like, oh, wouldn't it be great if Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 got remade and re-released? That'd be cool. Not necessarily, hey, we are remaking these, they are coming out. It wasn't as certain, right, when this was being talked about. It almost seemed like it was just something they were just playing around with. And the other interesting thing about this is there may have been a slip up that adds a little more to this rumor. So during a podcast, this was the 9 Club podcast, Lizzie Armanto mentioned that she was in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5, and after that saying he's coming out with another one, and I'll be in that too. Now, there's a few things about this. She could have been talking about some kind of remake that they are doing. She could have been talking about Tony Hawk Pro Skater 6 that may have been kind of talked about, and maybe doing mocap work for that as well, and maybe got canceled, right? It's possible, I guess. It's hard to say with that because it really seemed like Tony Hawk had moved on, seemed like Activision had moved on, and I thought it would have been better if Tony Hawk ended up going to something like Skate and being like the cover athlete for that, the cover skater on that. That would have been, I think, perfect. But Skate 4 is like, who knows what happened to that thing, because there have been so many rumors about that too. But Tony Hawk Pro Skater, if they went back to the roots and they grabbed Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 and actually remade it well, that would be really good, and I would buy that immediately. My question about this is, the reason I believe Tony Hawk Pro Skater HD was pulled down from Steam and other storefronts is because, like, music licensing, I believe there's like likenesses with the skaters, there's brands, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and it kind of reminds me of like Forza, for example, like Forza Horizon 2, which was delisted, and a lot of that has to do with the cars and the contracts that they have on those cars. I believe the same issue ran up with Drive Club. So that is my concern there is, are they able to go back, get all of the music they had previously, the likenesses of the skaters, maybe bring more skaters in, right? Because they're remaking it. They could probably throw some other skaters in there. Can they make all of that work? All of this, all this stuff they have to navigate to get to the finish line, and will Activision see it as being worth it? Like, I look at this and I feel like it's more about, can they get it done in terms of licensing and stuff around it, rather than can they just like rebuild the game or remake it. I think they can remake it without too much issue, but getting all of the stuff together without annoying fans too much that they're leaving out certain tracks or certain skaters, that would be something very interesting to see if they can get that done. But I mean, I'd like to see them do Tony Hawk Pro Skater HD, but actually do it right, not like half-baked like they did before. But these are all, of course, rumors, and I'm curious what you guys think about this. Would you buy a Super Metroid remake if it was $60? That's something you would go for, or would you want more to it for that kind of a price, right? And then also, what about Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 being remade? Would you rather an older one get remade, or would you rather Tony Hawk Pro Skater 6 get released and take your chances there after seeing Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 and I guess Metroid Prime Trilogy HD? Yeah, we're going back down that road, it seems. I'm not saying too much about it, but it does feel like at this point it's back out there, and maybe Nintendo is ready to finally show it. We'll see. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.